Hi, everyone. Congratulations to making it to the last session today. My name is Paige Bradford. I will be helping to introduce the next set of speakers. Just a note to the people online, please direct any of your questions to the Q&A tab on the Zoom. So first up, we have Hossein Lotfi from the New York ISO, who will be presenting on modeling of internal controllable HVDC lines in energy market operations. So Hossein, the floor is yours.
Do we have this slide? Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Okay. My name is Hossein Lotfi. I'm a senior market solutions engineer in the New York ISO. And today I'm going to talk about our work on the modeling of internal controllable HVDC lines in energy market operations. This is a published work in at IEEE PES Power and Energy Society General Meeting 2 years ago. So if you are interested in more details, please refer to that paper, which is available on IEEE Explore. Next slide, please. I want to give you a background of the work first. Next slide, please. So the New York State's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA, aims to deliver 70% of the New York's energy from renewable resources by 2030 and 100% emission-free electricity by 2040. That is what we have in the New York State. However, transmission constraints can limit clean energy technologies in upstate New York from serving Southeast New York, where most of the electricity demand is located. So basically, most of the electricity demand we have is in New York City and Long Island, but most of the generation is in Northwest, and we have congestion and transmission lines constraints formed to transfer electricity from Northwest to Southeast. The internal controllable line, or ICL, was proposed to alleviate the transmission losses because they incur lower power losses and they are more economical than the equivalent AC lines at the line distance. A HVDC line is proposed to be built between upstate New York in Fraser substation and New York City in Rainy point of interconnection, with both ends inside the NYSO's control area. And the nominal capacity of this line is going to be 1,300 megawatt, and it will be an underground HVDC line if it is built. It's a proposal as of now. The proposed line would be the first fully controllable HVDC line in the US with both ends in the same control area. All other HVDC lines that we have in the US are all of them, one end is in one control area and the other end is in another control area. This will be the first fully controllable HVDC line if it's going to be built. As you see, it shows the path that we have from upstate New York to the New York City, the red line, and that is basically the proposal of the line that is going to be built. Next slide, please. I want to talk about the energy market model a little bit. So the NYSO developed a generalized LBMP, locational based marginal price or LMP, that we have that in textbooks and everywhere, but we use this term at the NYSO. So the we developed a generalized LMP based energy market model for internal controllable HVDC lines. And so the characteristics are that it will be able to bid competitively in both directions of power flow, and the bids account for both transmission losses and a price spread between the source and sink. I will talk about these in more details in the next slides. Next slide, please. Here is a comparison between the existing models that we have at the NISO in our market and the ICL model as a new entity, basically. So we have wheel and pars right now in our energy market. For the wheel, they submit bids. So market participants submit bids, and based on the LMP difference between source and sink, we find the optimal schedule. And so the schedule is optimized based on the LBMP difference. And the drawback of the model that we have for the wheel is that they are assumed to be lossless. So transmission losses are not modeled in the wheel, and they don't support bidirectional flow. They always are unidirectional, either in one direction, from source to sink or from sink to source. But in the PAR, they support bidirectional flow. However, they don't submit a bid. What we have, the PAR models are basically based on a constant contract that a constant power is transmitted from source to sink. And so the schedule of the power schedule is not optimized, and it's not based on taking advantage of the LBMP difference between source and sink. And on the other hand, ICL has all of these features that a market participant submits a bid for the ICL, and transmission losses, ICL losses are modeled in the model that we provided, and they support bidirectional flow. The power flow could be in either direction, from source to sink or sink to source. However, in order to make sure that the power is scheduled only in one direction, there should be some specific market rules for their bid. And the LBMP difference is what determines the optimized schedule for the ICL in either direction. This is just a brief comparison of the existing models and the ICL. Next slide, please. Here is a sample three-bus system that we have. This is just a test case, and then after that, I will show you the results on the three-bus test system, and then the results on the NISO market. Here is a three-bus test system with 3 generators and 3 AC lines and 1 HVDC line between bus 2 and 3. And so the way that we model the DC line here is using 2 pairs of gen and loads. So meaning that, for example, for the flow from source to sink, as you see in the second figure here, we model that using a pair of gen and load. So for that, if you want to compare that, when there's a power flow from source to sink from B2 to B3, the power is withdrawn from B2 and put to B3, which creates a proxy load at B2 and a proxy generator at B3. Similarly, when the power flow is from sink to source, a proxy load at B3 and the proxy generator at B2 are created. That's why we use a pair of gen and loads. And in order to account for the ICL losses, the amount of the power that we have at the load should be more than what we have in the gen side. So for example, in this example, we assume that there is 1% losses. That's why the load is 1.01 of the ICL. And the flow from B2 to B3 or from source to sink is introduced by ICL plus, and the flow in the opposite direction is introduced by ICL minus, and the components associated with each of them are introduced by gen with ICL plus, and the load 1.01 basically times the ICL plus, which is accounting for the losses. Next slide, please. Here is an interpretation of the ICL bids, what it means, if it is positive, negative. So the cost of ICL to flow from source to sink is introduced by CICL plus, and the cost for flow from sink to source in the opposite direction is introduced by cost of ICL minus. And so if we want to compare it with battery, when we have the power from source to sink, um, it is equivalent to battery discharge. However, in the opposite direction, it is equivalent to battery charge, which is the flow from sink to source. And the positive meaning for the flow from source to sink, if the cost of the ICL plus is positive, it means that the ICL is willing to be paid, and for the positive meaning for the cost of ICL minus in the opposite direction is equivalent with it means that basically the ICL is willing to pay in order to flow from sink to source. And we have the reverse in the negative meaning for each of those costs in the ICL plus or ICL minus. The market rule requires the cost of ICL minus to be smaller than or equal to cost of the ICL plus to ensure that the convexity of the optimization problem. Otherwise, we will have problem in scheduling them. And this is actually the same market rule that we have for generators, that the bits should be non-decreasing all the time. This is the same market rule that we require to apply for the ICL as well. Next slide, please. Here again is just this figure shows those meanings that we had in the previous slide, that as you see, based on the cost of the ICL positive or negative and the ICL net flow negative or positive, we have 4 quadrants. And so you know that you see that the first quadrant will be the ICL a bit positive, and the ICL net flow positive as well. And if you remember, the net flow positive is equivalent with battery discharge, and the opposite direction is equivalent with battery charge. And in the first quadrant, as we said in the previous slides, it is that the ISO is willing to be paid at least the cost of the ICL plus, and we have those meanings that we discussed in the previous slides all in these 4 quadrants. So this figure clearly shows the meaning of the ICL bit according to the ICL net flow being positive or negative. Next slide, please. Here again is like another slide 10, please, previous one. Yeah. So for example, if I want to talk a little bit more on the ICL minus, the ICL minus is the flow from sink to source, which is equivalent with the battery charge. And the positive meaning of that is that the ICL operator is willing to pay up to that amount that they submitted the bid, and it is the flow from sink to source. And the negative meaning is that the ICL is willing to be paid at least that cost that they submitted for the ICL power flow from sink to source, which is the negative power flow. Next slide, please. Here is the set of the objective function and the constraints that we have for this model. And as you see, we minimize the total cost, which is the cost of the generation plus the cost of the ICO. And you see that the third term is negative because the flow in the opposite direction from sink to source is equivalent with charging a battery. That's why it is a negative behind that. And the f of ICL plus is flow from source to sink, and f of ICL minus is flow from sink to source. And both those variables are positive variables. And the rest of the constraints are the pre-contingency and post-contingency power flow. If you are interested in more details, as I said, they are available in the paper, if you can refer to that, or you can contact me later if you are interested. Next slide, please. Here, I want to talk about the three-bus test system and the results that we had. If you can. So it is assumed that generators and the ICL operator only submit one bit segment for simplicity, and network parameters of the three-bus test system are set as follows. The generation capacity limits are 100 megawatt each. The load is 250 megawatt. AC line capacity limits are 300 megawatt for all of them. And ICL capacity limit is 100 megawatt, and generator bits are 10, 20, and $30 per megawatt. Next slide, please. Here, based on these are the results that we had, and as you can see, based on the
5-minute warning.
sure, based on the different values that we had, you can see that how the ICL is scheduled in the positive direction, source to sink, or the opposite direction, sink to source. Can you go to the next slide, please? Here is an explanation of, description of each of those four. As you see, for example, A is associated with the red line, which means that if the cost of the ICL plus the absolute value is more than the marginal cost of the losses, which is defined as marginal cost of generation at the source, at the sending sending bus power times the loss factor, then the ICL operator wants to pay more than the cost of transmission losses. So the flow from B2 to B3, which is source to sink, is scheduled. That is the red line. And it is the same, basically, description for each of those regions based on the results that we have. Next slide, please. Here are the results of the NISO test case. I briefly talk about these. So the proposed model is simulated in the NISO's day-ahead energy market by incorporating the ICL model into the NISO's security constraint unit commitment and security constraint economic dispatch. And as we mentioned, the Fraser substation in upstate New York and Rainy substation in New York City are proposed to be source and sink. And can you go to the next slide, please? So the transmission, the ICL loss factor is assumed to be 1%, and the ICL contingency defined as the simultaneous outage of proxy gen and load is added to the list of the contingencies in network security analysis in our energy market. And the capacity limit of the ICL is set to be 1,200 megawatt. And next slide, please. So ramping and ancillary service constraints are not modeled since it is unclear what HVDC technology will be used for this project. And the day-ahead market that we used for this test was July 15 of 2022. So we tested on different values for the ICL, the bids, and then we can compare the results in the next slide if you can. Okay, these two figures show the ICL flow schedule and the ICL LMP difference based on the ICL flat bid from negative to positive, from minus $50 per megawatt to $50 per megawatt. For simplicity, again, ICL only submits one flat bid. It means that the cost of the ICL plus is equal to the cost of ICL minus. And this heat map shows different values for positive flow or negative flow from source to sink or sink to source based on the different values for the ICL flat bid. And the delta of the LBMP, as you see here in the second figure here, is the LBMP of the sink minus LBMP of the source. In 2 minutes, I will wrap up. So these two slides show more details on those figures. When the ICL bids are negative, it indicates that the ICL operator is willing to pay to flow power from upstate New York to New York City. Given that the cost of the transmission losses is relatively small, it is economical to schedule power from upstate New York to New York City. This is equivalent to the quadrant 4 in that figure that I showed you. The LMP impact of ICL flow depends on the variation of load and congestion pattern in a day. And when the demand is low in early morning, the LMP difference between upstate New York and New York City is small, even without the ICL. However, electricity demand increases in the late morning and reaches its peak in the afternoon. That's when the usage of the ICL is very beneficial. In the base case, without the ICO, a peak LMP difference is observed at around 1600 4 p.m. When the ICL flows from upstate New York to New York City, the LMP difference is much smaller, and this change can be explained by the decrease in sink LMP and the increase in source LMP. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is going to be the last one. This is the explanation about when the ICL bits are positive. And if you remember, it is basically equivalent to quadrant 1 and 4, depending on how much the ICL bit is. So it indicates the ICL operator is willing to be paid to flow power from upstate New York to New York City, or is willing to pay to flow in the opposite direction, quadrant 1 and 4. In the early morning, the LMP difference is small, so flow from New York City to upstate New York will likely be scheduled if the ICL wants to pay for that. In contrast, the LMP difference increases in the afternoon due to higher electricity demand and congestion. If the ICL operator bids a positive number lower than the LMP difference, it will be economical to flow from upstate New York to New York City, which is in the opposite direction. And the ICL is paid to relieve the congestion. The ICL can be scheduled to flow partially sometimes when the bid is close to the LMP difference. This is quadrant 1. On the other hand, if the ICL operator bids large positive number, indicating it is willing to pay for power from New York City to upstate New York, power will be transferred in that way, which is equivalent to quadrant 4 in that figure that we had. I think that should be my last slide. If we can go to the next one. Yes. Thank you. Sorry to take more than.
Thank you so much. A hand for Hussein. We have a mic for any questions in the room.
Also, while he's walking, I would like to note that we really appreciate Dr. Lotfi for making it here with an injury. So shout out to you and thank you for being a trooper.
Of course. Thank you. My pleasure.
Hello, Joseph Fanal, CEO of Routes Analytics. First of all, thank you for the interesting presentation. You have been mostly discussing what the active power flow would be, one way or the other way. But as you probably know, if we have converters on the two ends of the line, you can really control other magnitudes like reactive power, voltages, maybe even provide grid forming capabilities. So I know this is a bit outside the scope of the presentation, but what are your plans on controlling these magnitudes?
The reactive power, right?
Yeah, for example.
So for this specific analysis we had, we didn't study reactive power and like voltage control. The assumption was that the ICL doesn't provide ancillary service or voltage control, any of these. It was purely energy market model and the power flow. So we didn't study that, but that's a great topic actually for probably expansion of this study. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Zoe Mao from DRW. I think you mentioned you're using 1% as transmission losses in your HVDC modeling. I know this is a case in your test case. I'm just wondering, when in production, how did NISO determine the transmission losses in HVDC?
So this is not implemented yet. This is a proposal. We had meetings with some companies for this project, and during the meeting we had with them, they said that the technologies we have now for HVDC lines, we can achieve 1 to 2% of losses. Of course, it's not completely linear. It is non-linear as the power flow increases. But in the range that we had, the maximum, the capacity we had was 1,300 megawatt. In that range, the discussion that we had with them was we can assume that to be a constant number. So, but of course, if the power flow is much higher than that, we have to remodel that and we have to consider probably piecewise, like power losses.
Thanks.
No problem.
Anyone else in the room? Any online? Last chance. All right. Let's thank our speaker again, please.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Seth Mayfield from the Southwest Power Pool, who will be presenting on optimizing DC tie utilization in Southwest Power Pool's expanded RTO.
It's funny, it's always this side too, between the two. Hi, my name is Seth Mayfield. I am the manager of the market design team at Southwest Power Pool, and I'm here to talk about our solution to the West DC ties inside our RTO expansion. Go to the next slide, please. So if you haven't been following SPP, we've got several large projects going on. This is not Markets Plus. This is our RTO expansion and how we're handling those DC ties. So starting in April 2026, SPP will be operating in two distinct interconnects, the Western and the Eastern Interconnect. We will be a single balancing authority with two balancing authority areas that will be loosely connected with DC ties in between. Here you can see the two footprints with the darker area being the Western Interconnect. Next slide. So here are the connections of the DC ties across the Western Eastern Interconnect. 3 of those are going to come under SPP's purview. And so there's roughly 550 megawatts of capacity that SPP is going to be managing and optimizing between our two footprints. Having that ability, having two distinctly different footprints that are asynchronous from each other, present a unique optimization problem for us. And we're going to detail how we solve that. Next slide. So I did say it's one single market, one solution. Each of the balancing authority areas has its own obligation, it has its own operating reserve requirements, it has whatever comes with that interconnect. But we have a single market solution that is solving both simultaneously. And so we are trying to lower the production costs of the solution overall while maintaining supply and obligations in each of the footprints. And the way we're doing that is utilizing that DC tie flow to optimize that cheaper flow or those cheaper megawatts from one BAA to the other balancing authority area. Next slide. So the DC ties today largely scheduled on an hourly basis. People procure transmission service rights, they submit e-tags, they schedule over an extended period. That time may or may not be economical when it actually comes to fruition. And those tags may cross each other. You may have several people scheduling one way, several scheduling the other, and whatever nets out may not be economical for anybody. In the future, so post April 1st, 2026, entities can still schedule wheel-throughs through SPP. They can schedule across the DC tie. SPP is not going to operate to the tie. We are going to take that into account. That's going to be a part of someone's obligation, whether the East BA or the West BA. But when it comes to actually optimizing the flows, we're going to look at what resources are online, what is the most optimal way for the DC ties both to be facing, what direction are they flowing, and the magnitude of that flow. And so that will take into account not only what it's scheduled, but what generators are online in each of the BAs. Next slide. One more. So I know everybody in this room probably knows the components of the LMP, but a really interesting thing that we're going to talk more about is SPP is about to have 2 different MECs. We think of MEC as a single energy cost across your entire footprint. But when your footprint is asynchronous, it really it creates an interesting dynamic where we will now have an MEC potentially for the west, MEC for the east, and as those DC ties bind and the shadow price increases, you're going to see a price separation on the MEC between the western and eastern portions of our footprint. And we'll go over that in just in the next few slides if you want to go to the next one. So that that happens because of our reference bus. Usually you have a single reference bus. This is the location where there is no congestion, there are no losses. What is the cost of energy to this location? It's typically one. We have a load weighted distribution for ours, one across our entire footprint. That is changing with our RTO expansion. So the next slide. SPP is going to actually have two now. We have one for the west, one for the east. There are ways to have solved this problem with a single reference bus. SPP decided to have two distinct ones with the knowledge that there are only 3 DC ties. There are opportunities for those 3 DC ties to be out of service, and those footprints could be entirely separated. In those instances, we have a separate solve that's solving for the east and west at the exact same time. There's a host of other reasons for why we did, but the key point here is because we have distinctly different reference buses, we have distinctly different MECs, which will diverge depending on if there's any transferability between those DC ties. Next slide. So one of the first things we did whenever we launched the expansion was to talk to the DC tie owners and get some parameters, an idea around what we needed to appropriately model the DC ties. I don't know how unique these are, but from east to west or west to east, there are distinct differences in the amount that they can flow and differences in the ramp rates allowable. So those are all daily parameters they can submit. They can update up to the operating hour, both max, mins, normal, and emergency ramp rates. They can't switch every 5 minutes. There are maximum amount of times that they can switch directions, so that is offerable parameter, as well as a turnaround ramp rate factor. If we've been dispatching them up, we switch directions, they can offer in how fast we can allow that to switch. And then at registration, we are going to take into account a DC tie loss curve. Next slide. So we're going to take all those parameters. We're going to take the obligation that each of the BAs have, the operating reserve requirements, everything that each of the BAs need, and we're going to feed that into SCUC. SCUC itself, we think of SCUC as what's committing units. If we analogize this to the DC ties, our SCUC solution is going to optimize the direction of the flow. So don't worry about magnitude of the flow. The DC tie will be, the direction of the DC tie will be picked by the SCUC case itself. So in the day ahead market, we'll set a direction, and every hour up to the operating hour, when a SCUC case runs, we will determine if the direction needs to change. It's non-binding until the hour prior to operation. And at that point, the DC tie direction is going to be locked in. So in the same way SCUC is bring on units, SCUC here is bring on the direction of the DC tie. If you want to go to the next slide, we can talk through an example. So in this instance, the West BA has higher requirements, higher cost, less available generation. The East is lower cost, got a lot of wind in the East. It's trying to flow west. And so SCUC sees that price differential and says, I need you to flow east to west. 1 hour before the case, that is locked in, and SCUC thinks that's the direction it's flowing. One thing to note is each of the 3 DC ties may be flowing in a different direction. They're not tied together in any way. So that's SCUC. If we go to the next slide, we can talk about how SCED's handling this. So direction's locked in. We now go into the SCED case. In the same way units are locked in SCED, we are just trying to determine the magnitude of flow or the dispatch of the resources. We're doing the same thing here. It's got ramp rates. It knows the mins and maxes. It's optimizing the dispatch of those DC ties. Each of them distinctly different. Next slide. So in that same example before, we had a lot of wind, but now a resource in the east is tripped. And it was a very economic decision before. it was flowing a max from the east to west. Now pricing switched. And so instead of it just being operating at its max like it previously would have to that schedule all hour long, it is now going to dispatch down to min. And the next cut case may decide to change its direction. But at least SCED is going to optimize that flow between the min and max of the direction of the DC tie. Next slide. So some of the challenges we faced on this was even how to model one at all, what parameters are necessary, how do you model a DC tie that's tying to asynchronous footprints that may or may not be in service. We're doing some really cool things, which is not this conversation, but we're doing some really cool things on if all these DC ties are down, we still have to have a case. So we're solving an east case, a west case, and a simultaneous case every single 5 minutes, along with mitigation, inline mitigation, along with everything else we're doing. So complexity of our cases just went up dramatically, but we felt that was necessary to have the appropriate solution if we were to find an infeasible solution. And then, as always, how to drive day ahead and real-time convergence. You may have a direction in the day ahead that is not realized in real time. How do we handle price separation that can and will occur because of that? Next slide. So quick summary. 2 balancing authority areas, single balancing authority, 1 entity in charge of both footprints, 2 reference buses, 2 MECs. SCUC and SCED are going to optimize the entire market's cost of the DC ties, or of the market, using the DC ties to lower that production cost. And this is going live 4/1/2026. Next slide. Questions?
Let's give Seth a hand.
Questions for Seth?
Derek Wax, OCNC. Thank you so much. This was really interesting. What are the largest drawbacks to having 2 reference buses for the system?
So there's some, I was talking to Drew about this earlier. There's some interesting things. I don't know if it's a drawback, so I'm not going to answer your question. There is some fascinating things we're going to start seeing when you start investigating pricing, where if the MEC on one side is $20, the MEC on $30, or is $30 on the other, that $10 is really congestion, right? It's the congestion between the 2 footprints because you cannot flow across those DC ties. So pricing kind of fundamentally means a slightly different thing than what people are used to. It's the congestion between 2 balancing authority areas, not localized congestion. So it's expressed in the MEC. That's going to complicate a lot of the conversations of what is the appropriate price, what's going on in this situation that we're going to have. The other issue is probably just having this asynchronous footprint, and solving that every 5 minutes is going to be a challenge. And we do inline mitigation. So I mentioned we're solving all these cases. We're doing effectively 8 cases every 5 minutes between dispatch case, pricing case, mitigated cases, all of these solving for east, west, and between both.
Thank you. Jeb Stenhouse with Invenergy. Thanks so much for the fascinating presentation. I'm curious what lessons you're gleaning from this challenge vis-a-vis intertie optimization with other markets that you're not solving for yourself and that are not asynchronous, but nonetheless, I think present some similar questions.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we've had, as everyone knows, there are entities trying to build DC ties across SPP into MISO, into PJM, and other footprints. And we've gotten asked, oh, does this port directly into any solution you have with ERCOT or any solution you have with MISO? And the answer is no. The reason we can do this is because we do control both sides, right? But I do think there are certain key things around the necessary parameters, the necessary way to operate, how to go about solving one direction in a efficient time frame that do port, that may help with if SPP were to ever do anything like coordinated transaction scheduling with MISO. I think there's a very similar solution there.
Anything online? We have we have uh we have plenty of time for more questions if
Oh,
anyone
look, that
has any.
talked way fast. Got done with that quick. Yeah.
I'll ask one. Oh, okay. Sorry.
I went and timed myself at the hotel before and I was at 15 minutes. So I know.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm Hafiz Bazafshan from Habitat Energy. The question I have is probably very basic, but are there other coupling lines from the two balancing like the east and west, other than the the three DC type?
Yes. Yeah. And they're going to continue to operate the way they do now.
So they affect the MEC on each side, or?
They will not be a part of the solution. They're effectively a just injection point or withdrawal point. So they won't be affecting price any more than any other location does. They're not co-optimized in the solution. It's only the three DC ties that are a part of our optimization solution.
Okay, thank you.
I knew I wasn't going to get through without Russ asking the question.
It's completely non-technical. So I understood that this is for Weiss, not for Markets Plus. Is that right? So those are actually, you're doing those entirely separately?
This is for the integrated marketplace. So this is not for Weiss. This is for SPP's RTO market.
Ah, okay. And Weiss is yet a third.
Weiss is with the entities moving into the RTO and the entities going to Markets Plus.
One or the other.
Right.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
We have a question online. Okay, go ahead. Hari Kamp.
Hi. Thanks, Seth, for the great presentation. I just wanted to ask, why do we need to run an east case and a west case before the simultaneous solve? I know you were talking about a scenario where all the three DC ties are out, but can it still be just a single solve, just two different power balances?
We could have. There were concerns that if you were to only do that and you tie it to one single solution and something infeasible happens in the west or east, you can't get the case to solve, that we are now holding up both interconnects with our solution. So the west case doesn't solve, and now you have all your eastern entities that don't have a dispatch signal. And so are we manually dispatching these far more often than we would without this? So the decision was made to be able to operate these independently of each other if necessary.
Thank you.
Dan, do you want to ask your question?
I think you kind of answered it, but when you first talked about the two being optimized separately, you said the principal reasons were that a line could go out. I forget the other two, but weren't they all reliability related?
They are. I think they are.
Was there any like economic reason that sort of rose, or was it primarily just reliability?
I can't think of any economic reason we wouldn't want it a single co-optimized solution.
Okay. That was my question. So anything else online?
No. A hand, please. So last up, we have Andrew Martin from Nira Energy here to talk about how software can be used to automate much of today's transmission planning workload.
All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody for sticking around. I know it's been a long day filled with dense technical topics. I'm probably going to add to that, so sorry in advance. But I also want to thank the FERC staff for inviting me to speak. I'm excited to present what we've been up to at Nira Energy as we build software to automate transmission planning and interconnection studies. I'm Andrew Martin. I am a co-founder of Nira. I lead the transmission planning team, We're a team of transmission planners and software developers all on the same team to build the products that we build. My background's in transmission planning. I started my career at the NISO and then transitioned to a company called SmartWires, which provides power flow control technology to help make more use of the existing system. Through that, I got to work with a lot of utilities, several utilities and ISOs to really intimately kind of get to know their needs, which led to helping co-found Nira about 4 years ago. Next slide, please. So this is probably a bit redundant for most folks in the room, but I want to give a high-level overview of what transmission planning is through a specific perspective, so I can kind of hopefully key in on what we know the issues to be. As you all probably know, transmission planning involves the modeling and simulating of the power grid to ensure affordable electricity is delivered to your homes and to industry at a reliable, in a reliable manner, 24/7, 365 for years to come. And this is challenging because the power grid is very large, or power grids rather are large. They're the largest machines in the world, and they're comprised of millions, maybe even billions of pieces of equipment out in the field that all have their own tolerances and electrical characteristics. And these systems need to be modeled by transmission planning engineers as well as analyzed to conduct studies of the grid. And studies, really their purpose is to identify, okay, what are the problems going to be in years to come, given the changes that we think are going to happen? And what is the investment we need to make in infrastructure to ensure affordable, reliable electricity is delivered to the end users? Software plays a critical role in conducting studies. It's probably obvious, but it's largely remained the same over the past 20 years. And that's primarily because, I think any kind of new software development historically, until recently, has been on the simulation engines themselves. So these are the actual solvers, we'll call them for this presentation, that take in a model and spit out some answers. It solves, I think other presentations have keyed in on, what it means to solve these models. It's a big part of running studies. I would say, though, that software has really lacked a focus on data engineering. And that is what we would say is the most underappreciated aspect of transmission planning today. A way you can think about data engineering is really in terms of data pipelines. So a data pipeline is something where you simply have some inputs, right? What your grid looks like, maybe 5 years from today, 20 years from today. What's the generation, the transmission, the load? And then you want to get to some conclusions. And everything in between is a data pipeline. You're kind of holding that data through thousands of operations. You're pinging these simulation engines, these solvers. You're using Excel formulas and macros and copying and pasting data, maybe some ad hoc Python scripts. And today those data pipelines are they're human kind of operated. It's really transmission planning engineers that are the data pipeline themselves. And they don't really have a concept of what data pipelines are traditionally. And this is what we at Nira are keying in on. We're bringing data engineers, which is a subset of software engineers, software engineering, to build out these data pipelines so that transmission planners don't need to burden themselves with these kind of menial, tedious, and repetitive tasks. I would say that probably upwards of 80+% of a typical transmission planning engineer's time is spent handling this data and manually turning the crank on what we should think of as data pipelines. If I lost you there, a good analogy is running a study could be thought of as manufacturing a car. Right now, all of our transmission planning engineers are building cars by scratch every single time. And what we really need to do is bring some manufacturing engineers into the process and help build manufacturing lines to mass produce cars, right? We need that in transmission planning. We need data engineers to build tools for transmission planners so that we can build the machines that run the studies. Next slide, please. So this segues into what we do at Nira. So we develop software to improve the speed and accuracy of transmission planning teams. Why does that matter? I think maybe it goes without saying, but our grid is going through unprecedented transition from predominantly fossil and thermal units to a resource mix that's more renewable, includes battery storage. We're also adding unprecedented amounts of load, right? AI data centers are wanting to connect at pretty incredible rates. We also have forces such as electrification of homes, different industries, transportation. All of these things are adding to the complexity of transmission planning. And so this is why it's paramount that we give transmission planners additional tools to handle all this complexity. So our tools really aim to give planners a single kind of point of entry into conducting these studies. It leverages existing simulation engines and automates all of the repetitive tasks around them. The impact we're having as a result is more than 100 transmission planning teams are using our software. They've identified that it provides them value, and they've saved nearly 90%. They've cut study times down by roughly 90%, and have dramatically increased their efficacy. Transmission planners sometimes see that data or see what we're doing and get a little scared. Like if it's so efficient with this software, is that a threat to their job or to their work? Like, what does this mean for their future? Really what this means is they can actually get to the mountain of work that everyone kind of wishes they were able to do. There's no shortage of work out there for transmission planning engineers. There's always more we can do, and we're constantly trying to triage what we work on. I'd say most planning teams probably do about 10% of what they would ideally kind of get to. Next slide, please. So just to touch on our core products, our roots are with developers of generation interconnection projects. And we have two kind of different products for them. They have a very similar objective, and that is to increase the likelihood of success of given development project or portfolio of projects. So, this is probably pretty well known in this room, but one of the biggest inhibitors to a successful project is network upgrades on the system. And developers can sink a couple years and a couple $1 million into developing a project before they get back a response from an ISO telling them that their project is cost prohibitive. So what we do on the prospecting product is help them get out in front of those constraints by mimicking the ISO study process well in advance of actually joining into the interconnection queue. That allows developers to cite projects at the points of interconnection that have the highest likelihood of success. And then similarly within queue, this is a chance to refine that analysis. This is, once you have a project in the queue, you're then able to really sharpen your pencils on getting more accurate results. And so this is something where roughly 6 months in advance of getting ISO studies, in addition to actually the time frame of getting ISO study results, we help developers kind of shadow that study process and ensure that the ISO is actually conducting the studies correctly. This is maybe a bit jarring, but we actually conduct our in-queue studies more accurate than the ISOs do themselves. That's not to kind of place blame on ISOs or say that the transmission planners there are bad at their job or anything. It's just they're up against an insane amount of work, and we've built out the tooling to fully automate their process for our developer clients, and we're able to spot errors at a pretty good rate. Next, please. So just to key in on some of that impact, average developer using our software is seeing a greater than 50% kind of time and cost savings. And that's not to say their projects are getting online faster. This is to say that their internal process of developing projects to certain points, they're able to do twice as fast and at half the cost. And this is because we're dramatically increasing the efficacy of transmission planning teams. And they're able to cover more ground as well. So traditionally, transmission planners have been kind of pigeonholed to maybe a single region of expertise, simply because it's such a huge volume of work that they're unable to kind of handle multiple regions. So for example, a transmission planning engineer might have a MISO focus or an SPP focus at one of these development shops. But once you kind of alleviate them to think a bit higher level, kind of take those tedious and menial tasks and take them away, that you can kind of up level them to a point where they're able to cover more ground. This third bullet point, we've helped identify over $3 billion worth of cost savings for customers. A lot of this is honestly from catching errors. It's just kind of a fact of the manual process when you're doing these data manipulations in a manual way for months on end. It's impossible to avoid errors, and so it's kind of no surprise that once you automate the process in a robust way, you're able to dramatically increase your accuracy. Next, please. So this is, not to plug us or kind of pat ourselves on the back, but it's more a demonstration of, the market is recognizing that what I've talked about here, these concepts, they do have traction. And they're being adopted by a large number of transmission planning teams. So we've supported over 500 gigawatts of interconnection requests for over 100 developers throughout the U.S. And this is a slight snapshot of some of the logos we're working with. I'd say if you looked at kind of the top 10 developers in the U.S., we're working with a majority of them as well, if not close to all of them, maybe all of them. Next slide, please. What we're really excited for now is in the past several months, we've been working with ISOs and utilities to bring these tools to them. When we build tools for utilities and ISOs, our goal is to build tools for the transmission planners themselves. They are in the driver's seat, and we are not asking them to change their process or to change their underlying tools. We build alongside them to bolster them and implement their current planning process in a more efficient manner. And again, this frees them up to do kind of higher level and more important work. I mentioned before that they spend a majority of their time, at least 80% of their time, on tasks that really have nothing to do with their domain. Excel formulas, ad hoc Python code, right? They're not using their electrical engineering judgment. And so what we do is we enable them to kind of flip that on its head. And it actually results in, them having a more enjoyable job. They actually get to kind of use the skills that they went to school for. Next slide, please. Touched on this a bit as well, but I think, the grid it's evolving at such an incredible rate. I think, for the next few years, the grid is going to change much more than it has over the past 20. We have unprecedented generation and load changes, data centers coming online. This all also begs for the need to kind of do more work on the transmission planning side. We need to be doing more scenarios, more what if scenarios. And like I mentioned before, planners, they're in a position right now where they're unable to do everything they would want to do. And it's an ISO's prime responsibility to ensure reliability. And I think they're getting put in a precarious position with all of the uncertainty, all the changes coming online. And they're really seeing that they need to evolve their planning process as the grid itself evolves. Next slide, please. So just some key takeaways here. One of the things I actually didn't touch on too much, but I wanna kind of drive home is we we strive to simplify the software stack for transmission planning engineers. There are a lot of existing software products out there, these solvers that have been battle tested. They've been proven. They're very performant. There's a reason they haven't really changed in the past 20 years. They're really good tools, and they are not the problem. It's the process around those tools that's the problem. So we really don't see a need to reinvent those. In fact, I think it's actually a distraction or probably a downside to reinvent those. If you would like to get a transmission planning team using different simulation engines, you're up against a mountain of work in terms of training them and getting the entire community on those tools. So we integrate around those tools. And I think these concepts can be driven at every level. So ISOs, RTOs, utilities, developers, interconnections, generation interconnection planning, operations, long-term planning, all of these organizations and processes follow this same kind of pattern of you have some assumptions, you want to get some results, and there's a big data pipeline that should really be handled with software rather than tedious kind of manual tasks by transmission planners. And with all of this, we need to keep transmission planners in the driver's seat. We need to avoid black box solutions. Any automation that's implemented should have, transmission planners should have 100% visibility on what's going on. They should always have an off ramp so that they can pop into these simulation engines, run things by hand if they need to, spot check the automation, make sure that it's doing what it's intended to do. And they really need to kind of be a key stakeholder in all these tools developments. And we're building for them. That's it. Thank you.
And so if there's any questions online, just a reminder to put them in the Q&A tab and we'll get to them.
Derek Wax, OCNC. This was really, really cool. Thank you for sharing. How many of the phases through the interconnection process do you guys currently touch? Because it seems like you're working on helping site for the points of interconnection, but you also emphasized you're built on the solvers. So does that mean you are automating the pipeline all the way through to the interconnection agreements?
That's correct. Yep. We support all phases for any ISO or utility that has a cluster study process.
So I'll give you a chance for a commercial pitch, but can you compare and contrast what you do with Pearl Street, just since they also gave some presentations earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think David and I think about this in a very similar way. The key difference, though, is that they have their sugar solver. And I asked a clarifying question in their presentation during the Q&A, whether or not they would kind of open up that solver to the rest of the community. And it sounds like the plan is not to, but that's kind of exactly where we differ. We use the same transmission planning solvers as the ISOs themselves. So right now, MISO is kind of using two different solvers. They use Sugar for phase 1, and then they use Terra for phase 2 and phase 3. I would expect, I mean, we do know there are differences in how those solvers produce results. If you run two kind of side by side, there are differences for sure. And what's unfortunate is transmission planners are not able to get their hands on Sugar and actually run that analysis and kind of verify, kind of inspect what's going on. So that's the key place we differ.
Hafez Bazafshan, Habitat Energy. Just a quick question on that. Are the physical equations different, or are there like assumptions that go into solving those? Like, I don't know, distributed slack versus like regular slack. What is exactly different between like the PSSC versus like the I don't know sugar solver, but basically what is the, because like to me like transmission lines have like exact physics, so it should be a unique solution.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I have the same question, honestly. It's hard to answer that question without having exposure to the tools. So when you run Terra versus PSSE, for example, you do get very similar solutions. And if they're different, you can inspect, okay, what's going on? Usually it has to do with just the ordering of the solution, right? What generators are supplying what megavars? Depending on how you kind of iterate through the math, you can get different solutions. They're both potentially valid solutions, but that's where the differences would likely arise. I do know one additional thing. I think Sugar may be adding shunt support kind of incrementally throughout the network to help get it solved. To the extent that that's left in the end solution is a bit unknown.
Hey, Kristen Hensley, TVA. When you're incorporating the methodologies from ISOs and utilities, is it just the steady state piece of things, or do you also include like system strength requirements for inverter-based generation? Can you add in stability beyond steady state, or is it limited to steady state?
Yeah, so right now we are really concentrated on steady state. We do have plans to kind of move beyond that to the extent that our customers need it. And the reason that steady state has been the prime focus is that simply what developers are having the most challenges with. I think 95, maybe 90+% of network upgrades are related to thermal constraints from contingency analysis.
We do have an online question. That's an anonymous attendee. I'll go ahead and ask their question for them. Do you forecast network upgrades to resolve the overloads?
We do, yeah. As MISO and Pearl Street have kind of convened on that solution of network upgrade cost estimates, like we've been doing very similar things throughout every region that we support since MISO has kind of published their official network upgrade estimation guidelines. Like we've adopted those as well, but for regions that haven't, we've done a lot of historical data analysis to develop our own heuristics to help give developers some insight into what their costs may be.
Last call for questions.
All right. Thank you again, Andrew.
Thank you.
So before I close out, I just want to put in a plug for a happy hour. So although this is an unofficial commission event, the team is gathering for happy hour at Andy's. We want to extend the invite to attendees and speakers. So hope to see you all there. Some housekeeping. So tomorrow's sessions begin at 9 a.m. Hope to see you all there. And that's all.
Thank you, everyone.